What I'd like to say, just one thing about this is that once you enter the asset finance and project finance stage, if you have a plant which is in separate company, banks are going to finance that. That's normally about 75% of bank debt, 25 equity. And what that will do to you is means that the banks will take control. And that requires a different corporate and tax and financing structure. And for that purpose, from the left-hand side, simple company, technology company, easy to manage, few friends, just a good company, it's going to move on to a complex business structure driven by bankers, private equity that's going to come in, and various tax attributes. So it's going to move from simple to complex, and we're going to give some outline of that. There are three alternatives to before Jan starts for the valley of death, and first is you can all try to find a venture capital company. That's going to take you a long way until the first project is finalized. So that's a good option. And the second option is normally tag along with a good customer, utility company, municipality, and so forth, that has ample financial resources. And the third is create a joint venture, sell, or license. So what we see, those are the three main ways of getting over the valley of death.
Okay, and if we move forward to legal possibilities for internationalization, and here we try to elaborate that what tools we have to create business and grow the business to foreign countries. Chris gave an excellent presentation already on joint ventures, so we are not going to go those through again. But it might be worth mentioning that naturally we might have under the collaboration model also other contractual forms like ordinary distribution networks. If you are manufacturing biodiesel or bionafta, you might have only a distribution agreement with the foreign company, and that might be it. Then when we move towards transactional growth and organic growth, we can see from these arrows below that our commitment increases, our integration with the company abroad increases, but also our control increases. And in transactional growth model, of course, we can say that we then purchase a company from abroad, and there actually at the beginning it's a question of risk allocation between the buyer and the seller, but it's also a question of funding. And as Mika said, in cleantech sector, the typical buyer has been a large company purchasing smaller companies. But also there have been some technology-based companies that want to expand their product portfolio, make their offering more attractive to potential customers, and they have acquired other small technology-based companies. According to some statistics, we've had in the States 2,450 deals within the last six years within cleantech sector, so that's quite a big figure. So in the organic growth model, there you are thinking about establishing a subsidiary abroad, and there you have a consideration that, for example, when you go to a new country, it might be a developing country in the emerging markets, that if you establish subsidiary there, you fully face with all the political risks, market risks, and burden caused by different licenses and permits. Or alternatively, you might have a possibility to create a joint venture and operate with the local company. But if we look at briefly the questions that what should be thought over when you establish a subsidiary abroad, we are not going to go through all these points now, But of course, you have to start your process by thinking over that what would be the right entity for your company. And as said, in many cases that that depends on financing. You might have, for example, partnership models that were discussed earlier, but I have to say that, for example, in Nordic countries, typical form is some kind of limited liability company or corporation, how the firms operate. Of course, partnerships are used in financing because they are not independent tax subjects, so you might get tax benefits, but also they are more common in joint venture models. You start considering issues that how to finance your business, because debt finance or an equity financing, they mean just for your company a different kind of control and limitations to your sort of own freedom, and you consider that. Mika will discuss those later on. IP rights is one of my favorite topics, and there I have to mention one example from investor entry level. You might also want to consider that if you have a multiplicable concept that you could concentrate to parent company level. For example, all the IP assets are at the parent company level, then you establish different subsidiaries in different countries, and you might be able to then take the investors to the subsidiary level, and that way sort of also independently from this particular project leverage the IP assets, for example, using different brokers or licensing models and so forth. But otherwise, these are pretty much sort of points that we can return to these if there are any specific questions on these. One important decision you have to also make, and one possibility you have, is that you could directly establish the subsidiary in the foreign state, or you could use a middle company like a holding company that owns the subsidiary. And let's assume for a moment that we are in those emerging markets, and you have to consider that what would be the reasons why we want to have a separate holding company, for example, in some EC member state country that owns the subsidiary, or should we own it ourselves directly? There might be an issue that if your local investor, for example, is involved in the project, you might have a perfect shareholders agreement with that party, but if you are unable to enforce the terms of the agreement, the company law regime is not developed in that country, it's just a piece of paper. So you might want to have these kind of issues settled in a country that is, for example, neutral. Also, if you are unable to limit the management liability in that country, you might want to have a holding company in a country where you can do that. Just I would, at least, if I would be a manager. Also, typical ways to use holding companies are debt push down. You can use it as an aid in transactions, or you might also get direct advantages of the use of holding companies, for example, just by using tax rate differences between different countries, also within EC area.
All right, thank you. Now we'll try to expand that to financing structures and how it will look like there. We have a simple type of a structure on the left-hand side and a complicated type of a structure on the right-hand side. Now there are some boxes missing, but don't worry about that. They're probably lost in the valley of death once again, bankrupt or something like that. But on the left-hand side, you see a simple, technology company having few investors, big seed investors as well, government support like Tekes here in Finland, investment loans, and then you actually have some customers as well, or maybe partners, something like that. It's pretty easy. What you do is you need to have a good shareholders agreement. Since the buddies are buddies just as long as money doesn't come in. Maybe might be buddies after that as well, but it's tougher after that. So you need to have that. So that's the structuring point. The second is ease of getting money into the same place. It's really easy to say if you have just one place to put the money in, just one company, structure is pretty simple. That's straightforward. Now, and the requirements of government sponsors, those kind of drive the structure. Now, on the right-hand side, we have kind of private equity type of a structure, missing some points. But the point is that at that stage, if you have a private equity buyer for your company, later on, after a few years, you're still at the top with the green, dots, still holding on to the company. That's on some level. But what you can see, private equity requires different layers: holdcos, sub-holdcos, operating companies. Since the banks put the money on different layers, and there's the money push down that Jan mentioned. So the banks required that the structure is pretty complicated. How do you get from the left-hand side to the right-hand side? You have to plan, in my opinion, at least 2 steps ahead. You have to have a vision of where you're going and how do you protect that. We have some tips for you on the next slide, but that's pretty much it. Also, tax drives that kind of a leverage buyout structure. So there are different factors to take into consideration. On the right-hand side, if you strive for that, it's going to take a lot of planning, maybe holdcos to separate the risk of different entities. So there's plenty of things to do. What we're going to say to you, just how you can take a hold of this, the whole thing, changing finances, changing structures, is that first of all the investors are going to give you a term sheet on some level. I would advise to negotiate that well, since that's going to take you a long way. Take that even to a lawyer at some point, but as was mentioned earlier on, you have to have a good consensus before that. Secondly, make sure in the beginning and in the middle phases and in the valley of death especially that your shareholders agreement is good. It covers the expansion. It says about things that you wouldn't even imagine. So that makes it thick and long. Third, don't jeopardize your intellectual property at any point. You're gonna need that throughout the life of the company, and what the banks are gonna require later on when you have the project financing. They're gonna take security over all your assets, including that. So you need that. Protect that. Don't give it away. And make sure that your loan agreements, the banks taking over control, they're full of covenants, things like that. Make sure that they are not too restrictive on your business operations. And lastly, make sure that you have a veto on the way, so you don't lose the company too early. And as we mentioned, a smaller percentage of something is normally worth more than 0% of nothing, which holds true. I mean, if you grow, you're gonna have to give up part of your ownership, right? But it's better to have part of something at least. Thanks. Jan,
I think we have exceeded our time already, so. But in conclusion, we could say that sort of as a question for you as well is that sort of if it is as it seems that sort of venture capital financing is drying out, so our question for you is that would we be able to create more success stories for clean tech sector using these collaboration model joint ventures that were mentioned earlier, and that way sort of that way sort of share risks between small and medium-sized enterprises in this sector. So, but thank you for your attention.